Hey everyone, welcome back to Analytics Advantage. It is finally time to talk about some football. Oh my god, I've been so football deprived. The schedules came out, everything's in motion, we're getting ready. Should be a regular year. I'm sure you guys have seen lots of football talk, whether it's on the radio or ESPN or fantasy footballers or whoever you're listening to. What I'm coming to you with today is going to be a little bit different, especially for you guys who like to listen to guys like Warren Sharp or betting podcasts, stuff like that. My content is more kind of towards that crowd. So if you like to bet on football games or just like to bet on the NFL, maybe you like a futures bet, stuff like that, that's really what I'm here for. I love going through the stats, through the data, finding out where we have some maybe plus EV advantages. Some of this stuff I'm going to tell you right now, it is directly from Warren Sharp, whether it's from his book, from his podcast, just directly from his mouth. It's a lot of it is going to come from him, or it's heavily influenced from him. Some things are coming from other people, other handicappers that I've paid attention to and watched, books I've read. It's honestly kind of a mismatch of everything that comes into my filter, and I'm going to try to keep it as short and sweet as possible for you, directly to the point, and give you these plus EV plays. Today, I am not going to be giving out any specific picks. In my opinion, it's a little too early to do that. I can give you lots of examples, but just a quick one from last year. I thought the Chargers were going to be amazing. I thought Herbert was going to be really good. He had a chance to come in and really just set the NFL on fire. But on top of that, the Chargers had an amazing defense on paper, and I was really tempted to pull the trigger on some win props and some other props that were going on before the season started, before preseason even started, or I guess last year there was no preseason, before training camp started. And I'm really happy that I didn't. Not that they didn't have a good year, a decent year, but half of their defense was just injured and off the field and like out for the year before the games even started playing. So what I'm going to give you today is more just general rules and angles and plus EV items to keep in your mind. Maybe write it down. I know I take all of this and I write it down, and I actually have a chart that I keep track of every year. Not just my picks and how well I did for that year, but different trends that I'm seeing, different point differentials, how many points is scored on average in week 1, for example. What's the average point total in week 17, or what's the average spread for the last game of the year. Things like that, things that you might not think of regularly, but when it comes time to start betting, it's very helpful information. So I'm not gonna give you any specific picks. I'm not gonna go that deep into all of my information today, but I am gonna start ramping up here as we're getting closer to the NFL season and giving you a lot of that information, kind of getting us prepped to start making those picks as things become clearer, as we know who's going to be starting and on the field come week 1, and maybe even some preseason bets. I know a lot of guys stay away from that. I do have some trends and angles that I keep track of for preseason as well. It's much more limited. There's really only like 2 to 4 teams that I even really want to bet on throughout that time. But again, we'll get to that eventually. Today, I'm going to give you the plus EV angles that I find most effective and that I tail the most. And in a lot of these games, as long as certain players are going to be healthy, as far as like quarterbacks, you can probably make the play as soon as possible, as far as within reason, I should say. So let's get into it. Reason number 1: East Coast teams traveling west for very late games. So this is going to be either Saturday or Sunday or Monday night games, where an East Coast team, like let's say the Giants are traveling to the Chargers, and it's going to be a Monday night game. Okay, that's going to heavily favor the Chargers. There is a circadian rhythm that goes into effect there. And actually, just going back to last year, a perfect example of this is Tom Brady. You might remember they kept losing these Sunday night games, and there was one instance where Brady made like this boneheaded mistake, and he puts up a 4, like thinking that it's 4th down, and they're like, no, that's it, that was 4th down. Those were late games, and he's on the East Coast, whether it's Florida now that he's with Tampa Bay, or before when he was with New England, and having to play those late games was a real time shift for him, especially because he was going to bed at like 8 p.m. or whatever. The point is, these teams traveling for these late games, I don't care how athletic they are, how young they are, you're used to being in bed, especially as an athlete. You have a certain rhythm that you get into, and if you break that mold, especially when it's, it might only be 7 p.m. Central, but it's 9 p.m. Eastern time, and you're just now starting to play the game, that game isn't going to be over until, midnight or 1 a.m. Eastern time. Those guys are not used to having full-on game action at 1 a.m. So that's angle number 1. Angle number 2, and this one's a little bit less, easily noticed, is a double revenge game from last year, where the team is now a home favorite. So this comes from Ralph Michaels, great handicapper. He's been in the business for I don't know how long, probably longer than I've been alive. But one trend that he noticed is that if a team loses twice, obviously a divisional opponent to the same team, they come back next year and they are listed as a home favorite. They do typically win those games outright, and they actually cover the spread, or they're 77% of the time. So really good angle there. We don't get to use that one very much because it's a real niche spot, but it's something to keep in mind. And I know a lot of times people tell you, like, these guys don't care. They're just mercenaries. They're just there to get their check. A lot of the times they do. And even if the players don't necessarily, the coach definitely does. Because if he keeps getting his ass handed to him and can't seem to win divisional games, he will get fired. So he's going to pull out the big guns to make sure he beats a team that beat him twice last year. So again, another good angle there. Next one is for week 1 specifically, and this is something that I want to touch on later on, or just throughout the summer here as we get closer to week 1. Home dogs in week 1 are 8, 30, and 3 to the under. That means there's 8 overs, 30 unders, and 3 just pushes. So if you see a home dog in week 1, take the under is basically what we're trying to say here. Those unders come in at just a huge, unbelievable rate. So as you're going through your week 1 matchups, and you might even want to wait as long as possible for this, and I mean like up to the Sunday of, because if you know how public betting goes, especially week 1, everybody is ravenous for football. We are all hoping to see this amazing, great display of all these points and exciting, energetic football, which is great, but those bets tend to come in on the overside and they drive the number up. So Sunday morning before the game start, grab those unders for home dog games and just be happy you did. Even if there's 3 or 4 of them, odds are at least 3 of those are going to hit. So that's a great angle there. Again, not something we can use every week, obviously, but a great angle. Next, and this is going to be more team specific, and there's a few in here that I think you will notice are team specific. So this one here is the Saints. They are 3-7 over the last 4 years in their first 2 games. So in those first 2 games, for whatever reason, they just have a hard time getting started. I don't know, and I'm sorry, this is the last 5 years is what it should say. The last 5 years, they are 3-7. That's just, I do have another angle on this, and I think it might even be on the list later, but it just seems to me that Sean Payton is a very analytic-driven coach, which is amazing. The only problem with that, and you probably know this if you're using analytics to gamble and handicap, is really hard to handicap when you don't have any stats for that year to go off of. So those first 2 weeks of the season, the Saints typically start really slow. Last year, they happened to beat the Buccaneers in Game 1, which was great, and they actually beat them by 11 points, which that's the biggest win they've had in those 5 years. But that's also because that was the first game with Tom Brady. the Buccaneers were not as great. They did not look like Super Bowl champions come week 1, and they just hadn't really clicked yet. So Saints took advantage of that. But then they turned around and lost the next week to the Raiders. And I don't remember the score, but I know that wasn't a specifically competitive game. So just keep in mind the Saints are going to start really slow. Obviously, they don't have Drew Brees anymore. It's still Jameis Winston, which could be good, could be bad. But what I can tell you is that Sean Payton is the head of this thing. And if he's trying to use analytics and he's trying to use data, it's still going to take those 2 weeks to get that information down and to kind of get some information on his opponent. I would still go with this trend. I still really like it, and I plan on using it at least one of those first 2 weeks. Next, and again, this is going to be a little self-evident, but the Sunday night team, so whoever plays Sunday night, you're going to try to essentially bet against them the next Sunday, assuming that they are playing Sunday like a noon game. So if you're, and this is for the away Sunday night team. So if it's, I don't know, this is Cowboys and Buccaneers. I know it's a Thursday game. Pretend it's a Sunday night game. Cowboys travel to Tampa Bay. They don't leave that spot until, again, midnight or 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. that night. They're traveling home Monday. They're not going to get home until, whatever time it is in the morning, 4 a.m. By the time they get home, get whatever they got to do, go to sleep, wake up. The Monday practice and walkthrough is not very good. Tuesdays is just, it's an off day for the NFL, so you really have like 3 days to really get ready, and then you got to turn around and start playing again. It's not a lot of time. I know it sounds like, 3 days should be fine, should be enough, and I can tell you, like, even from my own family, and I tell them this trend, they're like, no, they're professionals, that's more than enough time. You say that, but you got to understand, football is a chess game. It's mental. The coaches need time to really pick apart their opponents, where they're going to attack them, how they're going to defend them. Lots of different intricacies that we maybe don't see as the everyday, general public. But there is a lot of fine-tuning that goes into one game, a lot of fine-tuning that goes into one particular game plan. And so that extra day and those extra hours really hamper your effectiveness. So the away Sunday night team that plays the next Sunday noon game, especially if it's another away game, really you want to just bet against them. I don't want to say blindly, but it's a pretty good bet, especially if it's not a well-run team. Teams like the Chiefs, I guess the Buccaneers, since they won the Super Bowl after all, those teams can probably get away with it. They have the coaching, the veterans on the team to know what to do. But teams that are either really young or just don't have an experienced coach or a good coach, let's say the Jaguars, those guys, that's just really putting them up against the wall. Let's go on. So the next one here is the Raiders, and this is a really, really odd one-off kind of stat here, but it is very accurate, and I won both of the times I used this stat last year. The Raiders are 0-18 now. I apologize, I didn't update. 0-18 when they play on turf in between home games. I have no idea why this works. I'm not sure if it's just an anomaly, and I guess it is. At some point it will correct itself, but that's going to need to be a really bad team that they play. The reasoning that I've been given for this is that the Raiders are a run-heavy team, and they are, and they're a defensive team. They want to try and play slow and kind of ground and pound and, all that stuff, which is great. But on turf, the footing is not as well. At least that's what some players have said. And so when they're playing on this, they're a little bit slower. The cuts aren't as crisp. The linemen are not able to push in as well as far as getting into their blocks. And so it really affects the game plan, which for the Raiders is more detrimental than most teams because of their playing style. So as long as that's not changing, which doesn't seem like it is, Gruden is still the coach. They still seem to be going at everything with the same group of guys, same game plans. I don't really see this changing, again, unless they play a really, really terrible opponent and they happen to beat them that way. But something to keep in mind. We'll have to go through the schedule more to find out where this particular angle comes into play. But something to keep in mind, last year the two teams that they played that were on turf were the Patriots and the Vikings. Both of those they lost by 20 or more points. So again, great stat. Something that's just not really out there a whole lot. Next here, so teams that play 3 consecutive road games. This is how their against the spread numbers look throughout those 3 games. So first game, they come out with the road game, as they're typically focused. They understand this is the game. They're playing it. They're going to be on the road, or this is maybe it's not even in their mind yet. They're just playing like it's any other game. So it's a 56% win against the spread. Game 2, now you're getting into not just fatigue, but you're getting into more of a mindset of like, okay, we traveled, we came back, we, especially depending on the time, we were probably tired, we either had a really bad Monday walkthrough or didn't have one, or it was really shortened, less time to prepare again. Now we're getting back on a plane, we're traveling again. Depending on where that's at, there might be time issues there, having to get settled in, all these things that you don't see on the field. So game 2, they only have a 44% against the spread win percentage, which these might not sound like a lot. 6% over 50, 6% under 50 doesn't sound huge, but if you keep in mind that the VIG on an NFL game is typically 4%, and you only need to win 52% of the time to break even, these 6% differentials are really big. These 6%, while again might not sound huge, this 6% kind of EV play here is going to dictate your winning season versus a losing season as far as gambling is concerned. It's going to give you that just a little bit of an edge that you need to get over that 52% threshold. And even if you're at like a 55% win rate or 54% win rate, those numbers and those winnings can be huge depending on how much you're betting and how good you are at this and how many angles you've got going here. So game 2, 44%. Game 3 is a 46% against the spread number here. That's, to me, kind of the weakest one of the 3 games. This is not something you want to bet blindly. You do want to pay attention to everything else. And really, on all of these, you don't want to be betting on just one focal point or betting because of one particular reason. You want to have other things, other handicapping going your way before you make it. These are just kind of things to keep in mind, and also things to maybe use as like tiebreakers, things that the way I use this is I look at these trends, I see which ones are coming up for that particular week, and I'll start my handicapping with those games, knowing that, okay, there's a slight edge on this side of the field because of X, Y, or Z. And then from there, I'll go into the rest of my breakdown. And typically, I only have 2 to 3 games that I really like after I've broken them all down and used these angles and trends. So again, don't bet these blindly, but just keep them in mind. Know that they are there and use them to maybe, again, either give you a good starting point for your handicapping or as a tiebreaker when it comes to your handicapping. Next here, and this is, again, going back to the Saints. So Saints cover only 36% of the time when they are at home. They cover 66% of the time on the road. That is one stat that I really, really liked and loved last year. I don't think it's going to apply necessarily this year, and that's because the exit of Drew Brees. The Saints were thought of as a great home team, and they were thought of to be this amazing offense, and so the number on the spread got inflated because of that. Without Drew Brees and with people realizing that it's now Jameis Winston, I don't think you're going to see that number get so inflated at home, and so you're probably not going to see that big of a difference anymore. So again, know that this exists, but I don't know how actionable it's going to be for this year. Next, though, and this is, again, you can tell, is from Warren Sharp. This is directly from his Twitter. So when teams play each other on a quick turnaround, typically the loser actually wins the second game. So these against the spread numbers, if you're looking at the screen right now, are from the winner's perspective, the winner of game 1. So if Team A plays Team B and Team A wins, if they have a bye week and they come back and play each other again, which it sounds rare, but it does happen, the winner from game A, or from first game, will only cover against the spread 26% of the time. Usually that's because the loser has more to learn from that game, and they have more changes they can make and that they're aware of, whereas the team who won doesn't really know where to start changing because they just won the game. What are they going to start changing? And they don't want to change things just to change them. So that quick turnaround really favors the loser. If it is a 3-week turnaround, it's a 51% against the spread for the winner of the first game. And then from there, we really get, kind of regular numbers like 51%, 56%, 58%. Those are all, yes, they are helpful. They're good to know, but that's not a huge, it's not going to stand out very much. Mainly because if it's a good team playing a bad team, I don't care how many weeks apart they are, the good team should be winning. So if it's 56% against the spread or 58%, okay, not a big deal. But when they get really far apart, so let's say you have like 7, 8, 9 weeks in between, you see this drop into 40, and 9 weeks or later, you see this drop to 33% against the spread. Now, why is that? Usually that's because the first game took place really early in the season, like we saw last year with the Saints and the Buccaneers. Saints came out, blew them away, did not play again until the later end of the season, and they still won against the Buccaneers, but they ended up losing in the playoffs. And so that turnaround time really gives the team that lost not only time to game plan and to maybe adjust their plan, but also to kind of change their personnel. And they can go back and see that first game and see, okay, who did bad, who did good, where do we have an advantage on the field if we just move a few guys around, tweak this or that. And so all the advantages go to the losing team of game one. Those kind of in-between weeks, like weeks, let's say 4 through 6, that's a really weird, kind of like a gray area, and that's mainly because let's say you lost the first game. Okay, well, maybe what you should change or want to change, but you're not going to do it right then and there. You have another team coming up that week, so you're not going to make those changes. And then the weeks go on and on and on, and by the time it's ready to play, you're going to be playing that same team again. One, you might not think that those same changes are needed. You might think, oh, we just didn't execute properly the first time. You might have different injuries. You might have different players coming in. You might have just different coaching personnel that's been changed. There's lots of different things that have changed within those short time period. And if there's not a bye week to implement that plan that you initially thought of when you lost the game, it's just really not a lot of time, not a lot of build-up to do that. And maybe you're just thinking, okay, well, now we've changed other things, and you're not going to dictate this game plan the way that you should after the quick turnaround. So, again, just kind of keep this in mind. If it's a really quick turnaround or it's a really long turnaround, the loser of game one is typically going to be your bet on. Next, so monitoring turnover rates. And this one is, again, a little bit different. So this is going to be team-specific for the Seahawks. The Seahawks are an amazing 17-0. So this happened once last year. I didn't change the number, but it's 17-0 when they play against a team that averages 1 takeaway or less. So if the opponent does not have a great turnover ratio, if it's 1 or less, essentially the Seahawks are going to win the game. And that's mainly because the Seahawks love to play this slow, steady, grinded out pace. If you've watched them, you know exactly what I'm talking about, what Pete Carroll does. Russell Wilson does not get to cook like he should. They love running the ball, and then running the ball some more. And even if they call a pass, there's a decent shot that Wilson is going to take off running with this thing. So, yes, now they have Metcalf. Yes, they have Tyler Lockett. They do have weapons that they can pass to, but they just don't pass enough. So when you're running and you're using this slow approach, what happens is you play these really, really tight games that come down to one mistake, one turnover here, one bad penalty there. And so if the other team, the team that they're playing against, is not getting takeaways, that really just shifts everything to the Seahawks' favor. So monitor takeaways, look at turnover percentages. There's lots of different websites you can use to find that out, especially as we get into the season, like after the first 4 weeks or so. And if you see that the Seahawks are playing a team that does not get these takeaways, especially if the Seahawks are playing at home. Bet on them, to win at least, assuming the odds aren't crazy. It's not like, I'm not saying go out there and bet them like minus 1,000, but if it's like a minus 140, minus 150, I would still do that just because I still believe I have the EV advantage there in that particular scenario. Next is the Vikings. They are 0-15 and actually this is 0-16 and 1. I apologize again, didn't move these numbers yet. So 0-16 and 1 when they play winning teams outdoors. So this will be a quick one to know and just kind of look at. And really, the first 2-3 weeks doesn't really, you can't really use this just yet. But let's say like week 8 on, if you see that the Vikings are going to be playing outdoors and they're playing a team that's like, let's say 6-1 or 7-1 or whatever it is, that team is going to have the advantage over the Vikings. And again, this goes kind of back to what we were saying about the Raiders. The Vikings love this slow game. They like to use Dalvin Cook. They like to use their tight ends. They like to play this ground and pound kind of game. They don't really pass the ball deep. They do have receivers that can do that, but they don't utilize them very much. They prefer to play this slow, grinded out, defensive-minded game. And if you're playing outside and your blocks are not as crisp as they would be indoors, or if your running back can't cut the way that he would on better turf, if it's rainy, if it's just anything that they're not used to, the Vikings are probably going to lose that game, or at least against the spread. So something to, again, be aware of, and something that you want to look through the schedule for the Vikings and see where you can kind of maybe think, hey, this team should be a winning team, and they play the Vikings week whatever. Just something to look ahead. Some of these, again, even if whatever your unit size is, whether it's $100, $10, $1, if you see some of these things and you agree with it and you really like it and you already like the game or the plan going into it, you might increase your unit size. And I only say that because if you're regularly a 50% picker, you win one, you lose one, you win one, you lose one. If you can find these trends going in your direction by increasing your unit size, even if it's by like a quarter of a unit, don't go crazy. That small adjustment can really put you over the edge. And you might even think about decreasing your regular unit size. Instead of increasing, decrease your unit size across the board and only do the one unit when it comes to games that have these advantages. And that way, if you are doing 50-50 the rest of the year on these games where we feel like we have a plus EV advantage, you put that whole unit down and you end up getting yourself, pretty decent wins. And at the end of the year, those extra half units come in. And even if you finish the year as a 50-50 capper, the fact that you did a whole unit on these compared to a half unit on others is going to put you in the win column for that year. Next here, and these are, again, some of these are more team specific, but we'll go through these quickly. I know it's already been a long video. So Denver does have an advantage in September home games due to the high altitude. So early in the season, a lot of players have not been totally conditioned yet. They're not in like mid-season form yet, and you're asking them to go to Denver and play in high altitude. So you see the other team come in, they get winded. They're just not playing as crisp as they should. And this is really more in September because it's still like hot. They're still kind of winded. Unfortunately, Denver's first home game is like week 3. And while you still could use this, and I apologize, I don't remember the team that they're playing right offhand. But while you still could use this, I would really be iffy on that. You want to make sure that they're playing a team that they have a legit shot to win, or at least cover. So obviously, we want to see what the odds come out at. I want to see what the spread is at and see how the teams have functioned to then. I think Denver has a decent team on paper, at least this year, but we'll have to see how everything plays out. So just keep that in mind, maybe even for future years. Next, week 8 should be a light week for your gambling. So this is, again, more just advice than an EV play. But week 8 is usually when you see teams start to change their game plans. So by week 8, you have a lot of teams come in and they have, either brought in guys like a Warren Sharp, different consultants to tell them what they can do better, where they're failing at, or they've just noticed certain things that they want to start kind of implementing, different playbooks, almost entire playbooks sometimes, that they want to start throwing into the mix. And so these changes really just throw us for a loop as far as betting is concerned, but also the opponent has given them things to look at. So again, like going back to Sean Payton, and if you look down just a little bit, Sean Payton again is terrible when he doesn't have stats on the other opponent or their quarterbacks. Last year, he lost to Jalen Hurts when everybody, and I don't know if you remember this last year, but everybody was just immediately saying the Saints were going to go in there and crush the Eagles because Hurts did not look great yet. And what happened? Sean Payton didn't have enough stats. He didn't have enough info on how to beat Jalen Hurts, and Hurts just killed him. He hurt him the whole time. So they lost that game. They just outright lost. Same thing with most other teams. When they don't have enough to go off of, they can't really game plan effectively. So by week 8, they know what their opponent is. They know what they are. And they know what changes they need to make. They know how to maybe adjust their game plan. And so week 8 for us, I try to keep that a light week. And sometimes I'll even just totally skip that week. And even like week 9. Really, weeks 8 through 12 for me, I'm very cautious with my picks and like how many games I'm really going to get on the board. Just because those weeks to me are like a real true feeling out period, and people are just kind of like experimenting. The teams that are really good already, and they've already kind of like, for lack of better words, they've already kind of locked in like a playoff spot. Like if they're 6-2, they're kind of experimenting with their personnel and what they can do and their playbook, and you don't really know what to expect from them. Whereas other teams that are really, really bad, like if you're 1-7 by that point, they're either doing one of two things. Either one, they're totally just mailing it in and they don't care anymore. Or two, they're going to be trying really hard to get some wins on the board. And again, the players are always going to try. At least that's my mentality. The players are there to try. They're going to be there. They're getting a check to try and win the game. The coaches is really what I'm talking about. If you're 1-7, 2-6, as a coach, you might not tell your players this, but you might not put them in the best situations to win. And that could be for a few different reasons. It's one, you want to find out what you got in different players. You might want a better draft position. You might be just looking forward to the future. There's a lot of different things that could impact coaching. But if they're 2-6, 1-7 going into that week 8 or week 9, it's really hard to predict what they're going to do. And it's even like a middle of the way team. Some of those teams that are like 5-3, 4-4, or something like that. Those guys, they're still trying to find out, what are we going to do? How are we game planning this? And let's change it dramatically to fit this opponent. So just a lot of experimentation that's going on that week, and really those set of weeks. At the end of the season, if we know what we got at the beginning of the season, we get all the teams trying their base set and kind of finding out what they're good at. So those two are my specialties. This middle of the season portion is like the toughest area, if you ask me. Next, Packers suck off a bye. Yeah, so that's something I wouldn't have thought of either, but I had been paying attention to it. And off of a bye, they just have not been good for the last several years. So I believe the only win they've gotten since 2017 off a bye was in the playoffs. So when they got the bye week in 2019 playoffs, and they won the second week. But other than that, they have just lost after their bye weeks. I don't know what it is or what they do, or maybe it's just like nobody's running that team right, but they just don't do well after a bye. So after their bye week, you might want to look to fade them. That could change now that Aaron Rodgers isn't there, but again, a lot of this is not player driven. This is more like a coaching issue. Next, Mike Tomlin on the road against sub 500 teams has a record of 16-30 against the spread when there is a double-digit spread. Record is 2-11 against the spread, and he's only 8-5 straight up. So, sorry, that's a lot to recap there, and there was no punctuation in that, so I apologize. Basically here, he's 16-30 against the spread when he plays sub 500 teams, and he's on the road. So a lot of different caveats there, but just know as we get into the season, if the Steelers are on the road and they're playing a team that's sub 500, there's a decent shot he's going to lose, or at least he's not going to cover the spread. If there is a double-digit spread, so if the Steelers are like minus 13, he's only 2-11, so he's again probably not covering that spread. So the bigger the spread, the more we want to fade him. And then lastly, he's only 8-5 straight up. So if he's playing a team that is like 4-6, but maybe they're just getting some guys back because of health issues or suspensions or whatever, you really might want to look to just either like put a half unit fading the Steelers on the spread and like another half or another quarter unit on their opponent straight up, especially if they're giving you like plus odds, obviously, so it'd be like plus 200, plus 300. Really good spot there, really good stat to know. And then really there's only a couple more here, and these are going to be in regards to the Ravens. So Ravens week 1, it's a must pick. The Ravens beat bad teams. Ravens, and I apologize I don't have the years on here, but I want to say the last like 3 to 4 years, their week 1s have just been amazing. They've blown out teams by like 30 plus points at least the last 2 years, and I think even before that it was like a 19-point win and something else. So week 1, they got everything going already. They have the game plan that they want. They have everything clicking. So week 1, just take the Ravens. Even if you want to just do like a half unit this week or this year, they're playing the Raiders week 1. Raiders they struggle against heavy blitzing teams. They're actually they had half of their losses last year. At least half of their losses come against teams that had a 30% blitz rate or more. And the Ravens blitz, I want to say they are the heaviest blitzing team in the NFL, or they're at least top 3. They're like 35% blitz. So definitely a week 1 pick for me. But again, just in general, just keep that set in mind. As long as Harbaugh is there as their coach, they're probably going to be a pick week 1. The Ravens also finished the season strong. So the last couple seasons since 2018, their wins have been 26 versus 24 versus the Browns, 28-10 versus the Steelers, and then 38-3 versus the Bengals last year. So while you might say these are just like, those are bad teams or they should have won those games, maybe, but they finished the season strong. They win really in great fashion. And that Browns game, it was a division rival, but it was really not even as close as it looks on paper. So, again, Ravens at the beginning of the season, Ravens to finish the season strong, really good picks. Lamar Jackson is 27-4 when they are tied or leading at halftime. So if they are leading, just the way that they play, again, slow, grinded out, run kind of game, those leads are easy to carry on. They're easy to keep and hold on to with a guy like Lamar Jackson who can run, who can get you the first down when he needs to, keep the clock running. It's a really great player to have when you want to play that style of football. He's 27-4 when leading at halftime. So if they're leading at halftime, you might as well jump on, place a live wager, place that quarter unit there. Just grab that win while you can, assuming that the spread is not crazy. What I like to do is really get these games where they're winning like 17-14 at halftime, and that's where I'll bet like my half unit. Because obviously if they're up, like 30-3, the spread's going to be ridiculous, and then you're not going to get anything by just doing straight up. So wait, kind of pick your spots, but know the stat. Lamar Jackson on the flip side of that is only 1-7 when losing by any margin in halftime. So same kind of thought process here. While that style of play makes holding on to leads relatively easy, especially with a guy like Lamar Jackson, that style of play is not conducive to coming back. So if they are down at halftime by any margin, same thing, same rules apply. You're going to jump in on the live betting and essentially bet against them. So same kind of thing here. We want to pick our spots, but if we can find a spot where they are maybe losing like 13-14 at halftime, it might still be, if they were the favorites going in, it might still be like Ravens -2 or Ravens -3, something like that. Grab the other side at halftime, and again, just be happy you did. Last few things here. So Sean McVay was amazing at scoring on first drives. So for first quarter betting was something I really got into last year. Sean McVay is amazing at calling up these plays to score on the first drive of the game. Even with the quarterback that I really didn't like in Jared Goff, he was able to do this, and he was able to run and just kind of maneuver his guys in the right spots to get them that score on the first drive. And Sean McVay understands grabbing the lead as early as possible, securing the victory as quickly as possible is really what you're going for when it comes to the NFL. And that first score right out of the gate just really puts your opponent in a tough spot because now they got to come back. If they don't, and a lot of people are like, oh, first quarter, it's fine. No, you do not want to get down to 14 or 21 or 24 points or more to a guy like Sean McVay. You do not want to dig that hole for yourself to try and come back from because now the opponent knows what you're doing. He knows that you're going to be passing. He knows that you can't sit there and run the ball all day, especially if that's your game plan. Like if you are the Ravens, if you are the Vikings, you can't sit there and hand the ball to your running back the whole game when you're down 20 points. Next, we have the wild card round. So this is more playoffs. Obviously, we can't use this for a while. But teasing the dogs in the wild card round is a strong plus EV move. So if you look back to the scores last year, of the wild card games or wild card round, 3 out of the 4 teams covered with 3 of the 4 underdogs covered when you tease them up. So it's really, really strong. That's not just like a 1-year stat. That's gone on for years and years and years. A lot of times these games are, for the most part, the spread isn't too crazy. It's like 3 to 6.5, somewhere in there, maybe the full 7. But if you can tease those dogs through, a lot of times you're going to get the right side. It's just a matter of making sure you don't pick that one who's got like no shot, the one team that gets blown out in the first round. So it makes it a little bit easier. It is a strong plus EV move percentage-wise, but again, still you don't want to do it blindly. You want to make sure you're picking your best spot there. Lastly, and this is more for fantasy, so I apologize. I know we said we were talking about gambling here, but this is going to help you as well. Trey Sermon was a rookie running back. He does play for San Francisco. He got drafted by San Francisco this year. He came out with the highest scouting report, not like combine numbers or anything like that, but scouting reports from different league scouts. He had the highest, even higher than Travis Etienne. I want to say he's higher than like guys who played in years past. It's the highest scouting report in a while. The only problem is that San Francisco does run a committee there, so I don't expect him to have this like workhorse role, but just know that he's going to be a really good player. He's going to get some touches. And whether you're looking at maybe taking some futures on him for gambling, or maybe you're thinking the 49ers are a good team to bet on this year, regardless of what you're looking to do, the guy is a talent. You need to be aware of him. And if you're playing fantasy, again, he's going to be in the committee, so I don't think he's going to be like the number 1 running back or anything like that. You still want to get him on your team because there's probably going to be 1 or 2 good games he has. And you might be able to flip him to something else, or he might just be that great guy at the end of your bench there, especially as injuries start building up, as they always do with the 49ers. He might be that guy who gets, like 1, 2, 3 games a year where he is their workhorse because they don't have anybody else, and you plug him in. So those are the notes for today, guys. I know this is a long video. I'm sorry for having it here so long, but thank you for making it through with me. I appreciate the support. I hope that these were helpful to you. Please, comment below if you have any questions on any of this. If you have maybe any picks that you've already kind of put money down on, or you're thinking of putting down on, I'd love to know. I think the rest of us would also like to get some ideas here. Hopefully, again, you guys got something out of this. Thank you very much, and have a great day. And hopefully, we'll all have some good luck this season.